website, Department of Defense, bid system, and it's super ultra creepy and really upsets me because you've got the state reps calling for martial law in Illinois and on CNN and in New Orleans, in Chicago and New Orleans. You've got the calls for checkpoints to be set up all over the country. You've got the NDAA passing and saying we'll use the military against citizens. We found C-SPAN video from last Thursday where they talk about killing U.S. citizens. I mean, that's going to be on the nightly news tonight. My head is even spinning. This is a giant buildup for war against us, and I was really impressed a few weeks ago when I was talking about the NDAA on the biggest overnight talk show in the country, second biggest in the world, Coast to Coast AM, and they had a Greg Hunter on after me. I can't remember if it was before me. The point is I heard him on the show, and he heads up USAWatchdog.com. I've seen some of their great reports, but the way he understood it all, tied it all in, where he saw the world going. Before creating and producing the site, Greg spent 9 years as a network and investigative correspondent. He worked for ABC News and Good Morning America, so great journalist. Most recently, Greg worked for CNN for shows such as Paula Zahn, American Morning, and various CNN business shows. Greg's a hard-hitting reporter who has a history of getting the truth out no matter how difficult the subject, USAWatchdog.com. Now, Greg, obviously you being in the media know about breaking news. I am on the Department of Defense site during the break. The caller calls in and says, look, I already tried to give this to you once. Look at it. It talks about FEMA camps being manned by the Department of Defense contractors and military and Red Force in combat with Blue Force. What do you make of that breaking news?
Well, here's what I think. For sure,
something's coming down, because if you just look at the numbers of what they're doing and the people and what they're saying, just out in the general press, I don't try to do anything other than really just analyze the news and things that Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, has said recently, that things are intensifying, that they're not only unfolding, but they're intensifying. This is what she's saying in the press. On top of it, you have the old Dominic Strauss-Kahn, the former chief of the IMF, who's saying basically they have a growth problem, they have a debt problem, the EU has a leadership problem, and he only gives it weeks. Now, they just dumped a bunch of money into that bailout fund, but if you believe the people who handle money for a living, the $500 billion they put in it, or $600 billion, whatever it is so far, this is what they're reporting, who knows what they're doing behind the scenes, but if you take a look at people who handle money for a living, they say it's going to cost trillions. That it just looks like this is going to collapse. And this is how we got all of our debt, incidentally, over the last 30 years, that we would just continually borrow money and borrow money and borrow money and create more debt, and nobody ever intends to pay this off. Obviously, it's unbelievable amounts of debt. It's in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. Just derivatives alone, according to the Bank of International Settlements, have grown $100 trillion. So what that tells me is they're handling the debt situation with more debt. And incidentally, this money in Europe, they're not paying anything off. They're giving people more loans, debt. They're putting debt on top of debt. And this is a humongous problem, and by the numbers, by the math of it, I just don't see how it stays afloat, just by the numbers on the face of it. The whole worldwide economy.
Well, I totally agree with you. I'm just dumbfounded by the sense that you're speaking here. In fact, I have the article you mentioned from AFP and Breitbart, World Economy at a Very Dangerous Juncture, IMF Chief. And just last Friday, she said, this could be a repeat of the 1930s. For those that don't know what that means global depression.
A deflationary depression, but back then it was a whole totally different scenario than we have now. I mean, they let things collapse back then. And money retained value. The dollar, two things in the Great Depression never were questioned. And number one thing in the Great Depression was the U.S. dollar. Now, I know a lot of people are afraid the euro's going to collapse, they're going to run back in the dollar, and gold's coming down some. But the dollar was never in question. The other second thing was the credit rating of the United States was never in question. And both those things have come into question. The veracity of the dollar as it's declining. Also, our credit rating has been cut, even though it's only been, one grade. It's still, we no longer have the top credit rating. They're threatening to cut the credit rating of France, threatening to cut the credit rating of the UK. All this is about the bankers making crazy, reckless, and I think in some cases fraudulent loans and bets, and they don't want to take a hit. They don't want to take a loss. They want to kick the can down the road, ting, 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 and they want to instill all this austerity, and they want people to pay them back their money. And they don't want to take a loss. My goodness, they want another bonus this year because, after all, they have to pay to retain that talent, the talent that almost destroyed the entire world economy, and we're still nowhere out of this. And that's the thing that the mainstream media just really doesn't report on. And that's one of my specialties is what does the mainstream media tell people? And they don't really lie. And you probably have read into this. They don't really lie. I don't want to say that. What they do is they just simply don't cover it. They simply ignore it.
Yeah, they lie by omission, or they bury it in the article, or they spin it.
Oh, I just did a story with the USA Today newspaper. I used to work for Gannett, and it was just a few days ago. And I called it, oblivious because of mainstream media. And people are completely and totally in the dark. And I was reading the story on USA Today. This is last week. And basically, I'm reading the story. I said, well, this isn't really a fair and balanced, this isn't a objective news story about the economy. They ought to write op-ed piece on this. Because, here they are talking about the economy. And listen, they're facts they use. Yes, car sales are up. Yes, the home sales are up, but they're in reference, they're bottom bouncing from being off 75%. So they're just bouncing along the bottom. And this is with, and home prices are falling. And this is with the government suppressing interest rates to unbelievable lows, down to around 4%. But anyway, so real estate's a huge factor in the trouble the economy is in. I mean, we've got this foreclosure fraud. They called it, robo-signing. It was nothing more than basically creating fraudulent documents so banks could go into court and take back houses that they should have never loaned money on in the first place. But listen, a Really Track story came out, and more than 4 million foreclosures are now in the pipeline. And so they're doing a story about the overall economy. Not a word about the 4 million foreclosures in the pipeline. And they're actually saying, wow, real estate could actually contribute to the economy in 2012. Really? With 4 million foreclosures, more than 4 million foreclosures in the pipeline, according to Realty Track? It's unbelievable the amount of omission that they have. I mean,
you're right.
They wrote this so their advertisers in the newspaper will feel good about the Christmas season. And hey, you guys at this is my conjecture. Hey, you guys at USA Today. Hey, we're trying to sell things here. Don't come out with some negative article a week before Christmas.
Exactly, and then they're using the irrational exuberance and this smokescreen to continue down the same derivatives path. The bailouts the banks have been given, they're only using to leverage it even more, so it's going to make things worse. It's not like we're saying, let's be negative, but meanwhile, I've confirmed, and obviously you see it all over the news now, but they are getting the military ready to be on the streets of America. Obviously, the system knows there's going to be a total collapse, and it's going to be 100 times worse when the general public has no idea this is coming. I mean, if we had the incredible homelessness in the Great Depression with people that were pretty much self-sufficient, what's going to happen when, let's face it, a lot of spoiled, rotten people, I mean, this is scary. This is scary.
Well, and I think what's going to happen with these, and for the longest time, I was like, oh, come on, FEMA camps. I hate to say this, but these people have to be as smart as me. I don't have any great degrees in accounting. I'm not an economist. I'm an investigative reporter by trade. It was a trade I've learned, and I applied my investigative reporting skills to the economy. And basically what I do is I look at what's out there and go, what can I prove? What can I nail? What can I put out there and prove? And there's so much out there, Alex, by the numbers that you can prove from very good sources that say, we have $12 trillion, Alex, 12 trillion liquid dollar assets held outside the country, according to John Williams, an economist at shadowstats.com. I think you know who he is. Now, can you imagine what kind of debacle could happen if people all of a sudden wake up and realize that the people around the globe are selling these dollar assets? Do you understand what kind of calamity and inflation?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Exactly. We are sitting on top of powder keg, and the fuse is lit. and it's only a matter of time. I just got chills. We'll be right back. I am getting chills every second. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Jones here, back live. Short segment, long segment coming up with Greg Hunter, USAWatchdog.com. I knew when I heard him on air, just amazing information, spot on. And it's really great to have him here. Hopefully he can pop in every month or so to give us updates on his research. But listen, I'm not trying to be sensational here. I've got children. I've got a wife. I wish when I went to urban warfare drills 12 years ago, I didn't witness Marines training to take on U.S. militias. But I shot video of it. It's not my word. It's in Police State 2000. But I knew it was long-term then. They were just beta testing. I've got family in the military. They say everybody, officers, you name it, is being trained for crowd control the last 3 years. So they're gearing up. And now I just read the documents on the Department of Defense site and FEMA and that business federal filing site where you file for contracts. It's on 3 sites that the caller pointed out, where it talks about the military manning FEMA camps and Blue Force situation command and control against Red Force here in America. Now, folks, that is military waging war against the American people. I'm sorry, Greg Hunter, you were making a point about an investigative journalist looking at all these pieces. Please continue.
Well, listen, I only try. I'm like you, Alex. I don't want to be sensational. Whenever we did stories at ABC and CNN, people would come to us and say, "Hey, I've got this story, and it's about such and such." And I would say, "You know what? I believe you. How do I prove it? How do I prove that X amount of cars are killing people, or how do I prove that depleted uranium is so terrible? And how do I prove that? And if I could prove it, I could do it. So I only do what I can prove." Let's go back to the banking system. And here's why, if you take a look at the big picture, people don't realize, everybody thinks 2008 we were saved. We were not saved. We were postponed. They spent $16 trillion, according to a government accountability report. Thank you, Bernie Sanders, for slipping that into the bill last year so we could audit the Federal Reserve of what they did. $16 trillion. You heard about the more than $7 trillion given to the banks, but $16 trillion. Anybody report on that in the mainstream media?
No.
That's not a story? I have friends of mine still in the mainstream media, and I say, that's not a story? That's a government accountability report? That's not something filed by some guy in Montana living in some cave. This is the GAO, and it was put into a bill by a sitting U.S. senator from Vermont, and we found out they spent or doled out $16 trillion in the wake of this, and we still have a problem. And do you know, Alex, why I think we still have a problem?
Because they're not using the money to fix the problem, and it's too big to ever fix.
It's too big, not enough money. And I wrote a piece when I first went on. My site has been on. You've been on for 10, 15 years, but I've only been on for a couple of years. And one of my first pieces was default option, and I said we should just take the banks to receivership. I mean, it doesn't fire everybody.
Well, Ron Paul has said that. It's impossible to pay off a black hole.
We should take the banks to receivership. We should protect only the depositors. We should, the bondholders, sorry, you get some. The shareholders, you made a bad investment. Depositors, that's your capital base, that's capital formation. It would only cost us $6 trillion. $6 trillion. We could have insured everything in the banks.
Instead, we've got to pay off the banks for their gambling.
It's unbelievable.
And they, as you said, you hit the key. They want it all. They're going to keep getting bailouts. They run the government, and they've got the military in Europe standing by, and here the military now works for the big mega banks to squeeze it out of us.
But it gets better. This is how serious the problem is. And most people in the mainstream media, I watch, CNBC, and some of the stuff they do, like I quote something from CNBC about reality track. Okay, some of the stuff they do is good. It's good, actionable information. But again, they basically omit. They lie by omission. How do you omit when you're doing an analysis of a bank? Okay, and I'm not an economist, and I don't analyze banks. But how do you analyze a bank that's allowed to lie? This problem is so big, they changed the accounting standards, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the FASB standards, in April of 2009. You can change it. They can value these Tier 3 assets, real estate, mortgage-backed securities, at whatever they think they'll get for them in the future. Now, you think about that. Wow, we think we'll get